Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the Pentagon briefing room, her crisp Navy uniform pressed to perfection. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference table. She had been called to this meeting without much explanation, only that Admiral Marcus Stone, one of the most decorated SEAL commanders in naval history, wanted to discuss her recent assignment recommendations. Sarah had spent the last 3 years working in naval intelligence, analyzing threat assessments and coordinating with various special operations units. Her work was meticulous, her reports thorough, but she rarely interacted directly with the elite SEAL community. Most of her communication happened through encrypted channels and written briefings. Today felt different. The door opened with a sharp click, and Admiral Stone entered the room. He was exactly what Sarah expected from the stories she had heard: tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and medals, each one telling a story of courage and sacrifice in places most people would never know existed. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. He glanced down at the file in his hand, then back at her. "I've been reviewing your personnel record and your recent intelligence assessments regarding the situation in Southeast Asia." Sarah remained at attention, keeping her expression neutral despite the questions racing through her mind. Why was someone of Admiral Stone's rank personally reviewing her work? She was good at her job, but she was still relatively junior in the intelligence community. "At ease, Lieutenant," Admiral Stone continued, moving to take a seat at the head of the table. "I'll be direct with you. We have a developing situation that requires someone with your specific skill set and language capabilities. Your Vietnamese is fluent, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Native fluency." "My parents immigrated from Vietnam before I was born, and I grew up speaking both languages at home." The Admiral nodded approvingly. "Good. We also need someone who can blend in locally and gather intelligence without drawing attention. However, I have some concerns about your readiness for this type of assignment." Sarah felt a small knot form in her stomach. She had been hoping for more challenging assignments, something that would allow her to use her skills in the field rather than behind a desk. "May I ask what concerns you have, sir?" Admiral Stone leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her uniform with obvious skepticism. "Lieutenant, special operations work isn't about sitting in air-conditioned offices analyzing data. It's about making life-or-death decisions in hostile territory with limited support. It requires a level of mental toughness and practical experience that, frankly, I'm not seeing in your background." The Admiral's words stung, but Sarah kept her expression composed. She had heard variations of this speech before, usually from officers who saw her petite frame and academic background and made assumptions about her capabilities. At 5 feet 4 inches tall with a slight build, she knew she didn't look like what most people expected from someone in special operations. "Your record shows excellent analytical work," Admiral Stone continued, "but analysis and field work are completely different animals. In the field, you don't get second chances to review your data or consult with colleagues. You make decisions based on incomplete information, often while under fire or in immediate danger." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand the challenges, sir. I believe my training and background have prepared me for this type of work." Admiral Stone raised an eyebrow. "Training? You've completed the standard intelligence officer course and some basic firearms instruction. That's hardly preparation for operating in a combat zone alongside elite special operations units." The Admiral stood and walked to the window, looking out at the busy Pentagon parking lot. "Lieutenant, I've been in this business for over 25 years. I've seen dozens of intelligence officers who thought they were ready for fieldwork. Most of them lasted about a week before requesting reassignment back to their desks." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. She understood the Admiral's skepticism, but his dismissive tone was beginning to irritate her. She had worked hard to get where she was, often having to prove herself twice as much as her male colleagues simply because of preconceptions about her appearance and background. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. Admiral Stone turned back to face her, looking mildly surprised. "Granted." Sir, with respect, I believe you're making assumptions about my capabilities based on incomplete information. While my official record may not show extensive combat training, I have pursued additional qualifications on my own time because I knew opportunities like this might arise. The Admiral crossed his arms, looking skeptical but curious. Such as? Sarah took a breath. I've completed advanced marksmanship courses, including long-range precision shooting. I've also trained in close-quarters combat, survival skills, and advanced reconnaissance techniques. Most of this training was done during leave time or weekends because I wanted to be prepared for assignments that would actually utilize my full potential. Admiral Stone's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed he was paying closer attention now. Anyone can take weekend courses, Lieutenant. That doesn't mean you're ready for the real thing. You're absolutely right, sir, Sarah replied calmly. Which is why I also requested additional training assignments whenever possible. Last year, I spent 3 weeks with a Marine reconnaissance unit during their mountain warfare exercises. I scored in the top 10% for navigation, marksmanship, and tactical decision-making. The Admiral's eyebrows rose slightly. That wasn't in your file. It was training I arranged through personal contacts, sir. Technically it was vacation time, but I thought the experience would be valuable. Admiral Stone returned to his seat, studying Sarah with new interest. Why didn't you request transfer to a more active role if you were interested in this type of work? Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. Because I knew requests would be denied based on my profile. Intelligence officers with language skills like mine are considered too valuable to risk in the field. But I've always believed that the best intelligence comes from understanding situations firsthand, not just from reports and data analysis. The Admiral was quiet for several seconds, apparently weighing her words. The mission we're discussing involves embedding with a SEAL team for an extended period. You'd be operating in hostile territory with minimal backup and communication. If something goes wrong, extraction could take days or weeks. Are you prepared for that level of risk? Yes, sir, I am. Admiral Stone stood and walked to a wall map showing Southeast Asia. The situation involves a suspected weapons trafficking operation that's been supplying insurgent groups in the region. Standard intelligence gathering methods haven't been effective because the operation is run by locals who can spot most of our usual assets from miles away. He pointed to a specific area on the map. We need someone who can pass as a local, speak the language fluently, and gather intelligence on their operation methods and key personnel. But we also need someone who can handle themselves if the situation goes bad. Sarah stepped closer to study the map. How long would the assignment last? Potentially several months. You'd be working with a small SEAL team, but much of the intelligence gathering would be your responsibility. The team leader has specifically requested someone with your background, but I wanted to meet you personally before approving the assignment. The Admiral turned to face her directly. I'll be honest, Lieutenant. I have serious reservations about sending someone with your limited field experience into this situation. The SEAL team you'd be working with doesn't have time to babysit an intelligence officer who can't keep up or handle the pressure. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I understand your concerns, sir, but I believe I can prove that your reservations are unfounded. What would it take to convince you that I'm ready for this assignment? Admiral Stone studied her for a long moment. Confidence is good, Lieutenant, but overconfidence gets people killed. In special operations, we don't take chances on people who haven't proven themselves under real pressure. Then, give me a chance to prove myself, Sarah replied without hesitation. The Admiral seemed surprised by her directness. Most junior officers were more deferential when speaking with someone of his rank. What exactly are you proposing? Put me through whatever evaluation you think is appropriate. If I can't meet your standards, I'll withdraw my name from consideration and return to my current assignment without complaint. Admiral Stone walked back to his chair and sat down, drumming his fingers on the table as he considered her proposal. You realize that SEAL evaluation standards are designed to push people beyond their breaking points? They're not adjusted for gender or body size. I wouldn't want them to be, sir. The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but Sarah thought she detected a hint of respect in his eyes.
Very well, Lieutenant.
I'll arrange for you to undergo a modified version of our field readiness assessment. It will test your physical capabilities, decision-making under pressure, and ability to operate independently in challenging conditions.
Sarah felt a surge of excitement but kept her expression professional. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Don't thank me yet, Admiral Stone warned.
This assessment has broken seasoned officers who thought they were ready for special operations work. If you fail, it goes in your permanent record, and it could affect your future career prospects.
I understand the risks, sir.
Admiral Stone closed the file on the table and stood.
The assessment will begin Monday morning at 0500 hours at Quantico. You'll receive detailed instructions by tomorrow evening.
I suggest you use the weekend to prepare yourself mentally and physically. As he moved toward the door, the Admiral paused and looked back at her.
Lieutenant, I hope you understand that my skepticism isn't personal. I've seen too many good people get hurt or killed because someone made the wrong judgment about their readiness.
In this business, cautious assumptions save lives. I do understand, sir, and I respect your position. I just ask that you judge me based on my performance, not on assumptions about my limitations.
Admiral Stone nodded slowly. Fair enough. We'll see what you're made of on Monday.
After the Admiral left, Sarah remained standing in the empty briefing room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. She had been hoping for a more challenging assignment, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Working directly with a SEAL team in a combat zone would be the opportunity of a lifetime, but only if she could prove herself worthy of Admiral Stone's trust. She thought about the upcoming assessment and what it might involve. SEAL training was legendary for its intensity and high failure rate. Even a modified version would likely push her to her absolute limits. But she had been preparing for something like this for years, even when she wasn't sure the opportunity would ever come. That evening, Sarah returned to her small apartment near Washington, D.C. and began planning her preparation for the assessment. She pulled out training logs from her weekend courses and reviewed her performance metrics. Her marksmanship scores were consistently high, and her endurance training had been progressing steadily. But she knew that physical capability was only part of what would be evaluated.
The mental aspects would be just as important.
Decision-making under extreme stress, leadership potential, and the ability to maintain focus during extended periods of pressure.
These were things that couldn't be learned from textbooks or weekend courses.
They had to be developed through experience and tested under real conditions. Sarah spent the weekend in intense preparation, reviewing tactical procedures, practicing marksmanship at the local range, and pushing herself through punishing physical training sessions. She knew that Admiral Stone expected her to fail, and she was determined to prove him wrong.
As Sunday evening approached, she received the detailed instructions for Monday's assessment.
The document was several pages long and outlined a complex series of physical, mental, and tactical evaluations that would span 3 days. Some of the requirements made her stomach clench with nervousness, but her resolve remained firm. She had asked for the chance to prove herself, and now she would have it. Whatever Admiral Stone's assessment threw at her, she would meet it head-on and show him that his assumptions about her limitations were wrong. The opportunity to work with an elite SEAL team and make a real difference in the field was worth any amount of pain and challenge she might face in the next few days.
Monday morning arrived with a cold rain that made the drive to Quantico treacherous. Sarah arrived at the Marine base 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, wanting to be prepared for whatever awaited her.
She wore the standard physical training uniform she had been instructed to bring, along with boots that had carried her through countless training sessions. The assessment coordinator was Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a compact man in his 40s whose weathered face and calm demeanor suggested decades of experience in challenging situations.
He reviewed Sarah's paperwork with professional efficiency before explaining the first phase of evaluation. Lieutenant Chen, this assessment is designed to evaluate your readiness for extended special operations deployment.
We'll be testing physical endurance, marksmanship, tactical decision-making, and your ability to function under stress. Admiral Stone has specifically requested that you be evaluated using the same standards applied to any candidate for this type of assignment.
Sarah nodded. I understand, Master Chief. The first phase is physical fitness and endurance.
You'll complete a modified obstacle course followed by a timed run and swimming evaluation.
Standards are non-negotiable. Failure to meet minimum requirements in any area results in immediate dismissal from the assessment.
The obstacle course was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her regular fitness training. It included rope climbing, wall scaling, crawling under barbed wire through mud, and carrying heavy equipment over various terrains. Each obstacle was designed to test not just physical strength but also problem-solving ability and determination. Sarah attacked each challenge methodically, drawing on techniques she had learned during her weekend training sessions. Her smaller size actually proved advantageous in some areas, allowing her to navigate tight spaces more easily than larger candidates might. When she reached obstacles that required pure strength, she compensated with technique and persistence. The rope climb nearly defeated her. Her arms burned with fatigue as she struggled to maintain her grip while pulling herself upward. Other candidates who had started after her were finishing before she reached the top. For a moment, she considered letting go and accepting failure. Then, she thought about Admiral Stone's dismissive comments and forced herself to continue climbing. Master Chief Rodriguez watched her progress without expression, making notes on his clipboard. When she finally reached the top of the rope, her hands were bleeding and her muscles trembling with exhaustion. But she had made it within the required time limit. The distance run was equally challenging.
6 miles over varied terrain while carrying a 40-pound pack.
Sarah had trained for distance running, but never with this much weight over such difficult ground. By the 3rd mile, her legs felt like lead and her breathing was labored. Other candidates were pulling ahead of her, their longer strides eating up distance more efficiently. But Sarah had learned to pace herself during her solo training sessions. While others started strong and faded in the later miles, she maintained a steady rhythm that slowly began to close the gap. Her Vietnamese grandmother had always told her that persistence was more valuable than speed, and those words echoed in her mind as she pushed through the pain. She finished the run within the required time, though barely. Several candidates had already completed the course and were resting while she crossed the finish line. Master Chief Rodriguez checked his stopwatch and made another note, his expression revealing nothing about her performance. The swimming evaluation was held at an indoor pool designed for military training. Candidates had to swim a specific distance while wearing full combat gear, then complete underwater navigation exercises that tested breath control and spatial awareness.
For many candidates, this was the most challenging part of the physical assessment. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer.
Growing up near the Chesapeake Bay, she had spent summers in the water and had even considered trying out for her college swim team. The weight of the combat gear made movement more difficult, but she adjusted her technique and found a rhythm that allowed her to maintain forward progress. The underwater navigation was more challenging. Candidates had to swim underwater through a series of obstacles while following specific directional markers. Panic was common when people realized how long they would need to hold their breath while navigating in near darkness. Sarah forced herself to remain calm and methodical. She had practiced breath control during her martial arts training, and those techniques served her well now. She moved through the underwater course slowly but steadily, conserving oxygen and maintaining her orientation. When she finally surfaced at the endpoint, she was one of only 5 candidates who had completed the navigation successfully on their first attempt.
Master Chief Rodriguez gathered the remaining candidates for a brief break before the next phase.
Congratulations to those who have made it this far.
Physical fitness is just the foundation.
The next phase will test your tactical knowledge and decision-making abilities. The tactical evaluation took place in a mock urban environment designed to simulate real-world operational conditions. Candidates were presented with various scenarios and had to demonstrate appropriate responses under time pressure. The scenarios included hostage situations, intelligence gathering in hostile territory, and coordinating with local assets. Sarah found this phase more suited to her strengths. Her intelligence background had given her extensive training in threat assessment and tactical planning. When presented with scenarios involving gathering information from unwilling sources, she drew on her language skills and cultural knowledge to develop approaches that other candidates hadn't considered.
One scenario particularly challenged the group.
They were told to plan an intelligence gathering operation in a hostile village where previous attempts had failed because locals could identify American operatives immediately. Most candidates suggested standard infiltration techniques or advanced surveillance technology.
Sarah proposed a different approach. If the problem is that locals can identify Americans, then we need someone who won't be identified as American. I could pose as a Vietnamese businesswoman interested in investing in local infrastructure.
My language skills and cultural background would allow me to gather information through normal business interactions. The evaluating officers exchanged glances. This type of creative problem solving was exactly what they were looking for, but they wanted to test her ability to handle challenges to her plan.
What if your cover is blown? One officer asked. How do you extract yourself without compromising the operation or endangering your team? Sarah had anticipated this question.
I would have pre-established extraction protocols with the team, including multiple backup plans.
If cover is blown, the priority is information protection first, then personal safety.
I would follow protocols for destroying sensitive materials and use predetermined signals to alert the team of compromise. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes as the officers probed every aspect of her proposed plan. Sarah answered each question thoughtfully, demonstrating both tactical knowledge and the flexibility to adapt when presented with new complications. Master Chief Rodriguez called for another break as the first day's evaluation concluded.
Tomorrow we begin the most challenging phase. Stress testing and simulated operational scenarios. Get a good night's rest, because you'll need it.
That evening, Sarah reviewed her performance and tried to assess how she was doing compared to the other candidates. The physical challenges had pushed her to her limits, but she had met all the minimum standards. The tactical evaluation had felt more comfortable, playing to her analytical strengths and specialized knowledge. But she knew that the real test was still coming. The stress testing phase would evaluate how candidates performed when pushed beyond their normal limits while dealing with complex problems and life-or-death decisions. This was where many candidates broke, unable to maintain clear thinking under extreme pressure. Tuesday began before dawn with a scenario designed to test candidates' ability to function without adequate sleep while dealing with multiple stressful situations simultaneously. They were awakened after only 3 hours of sleep and immediately presented with a complex intelligence analysis task that had to be completed within a tight deadline.
Sarah's years of experience working long hours on critical intelligence assessments served her well.
She was accustomed to functioning on minimal sleep while maintaining attention to detail and analytical accuracy. While other candidates struggled with fatigue-induced errors, she methodically worked through the information and produced a comprehensive analysis within the time limit.
The day continued with a series of increasingly challenging scenarios.
Candidates were placed in simulated captivity situations and had to demonstrate resistance to interrogation techniques. They were presented with ethical dilemmas that had no clear right answers and forced to make decisions under extreme time pressure. During one scenario, Sarah was told that she had been captured while on an intelligence-gathering mission and was being interrogated by enemy forces seeking information about her team's location and objectives. The interrogators used a combination of psychological pressure and mild physical discomfort to try to break her resistance. Drawing on her training in counterintelligence techniques, Sarah maintained her cover story consistently while providing minimal information that could be used against her team. When the interrogators tried to convince her that her teammates had already been captured and were being tortured, she used breathing techniques she had learned in martial arts training to maintain emotional control. "Your friends are already talking," one interrogator said, leaning close to her face.
"They've told us everything about your mission. You're protecting people who have already given you up." Sarah looked directly at him without flinching. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a businesswoman conducting market research. I have no friends in this area."
The interrogation continued for over an hour, with the interrogators becoming increasingly aggressive in their attempts to break her story. Sarah's hands were beginning to shake from stress and fatigue, but she maintained her composure and stuck to her cover identity throughout the ordeal.
When the scenario ended, Master Chief Rodriguez reviewed her performance with clinical objectivity.
Your resistance was good, Lieutenant.
You maintained operational security and didn't provide actionable intelligence. However, I noticed signs of physical stress.
In a real situation, interrogators would have exploited those tells. Sarah nodded, making mental notes about areas where she needed improvement.
How can I better control those physical responses, Master Chief? Practice and experience.
The more you're exposed to high-stress situations, the better your body learns to manage the physiological responses.
But be aware that everyone has breaking points.
The key is knowing your limits and having contingency plans.
The final day of assessment included the most challenging scenario yet.
Candidates were placed in teams and given a complex mission that required coordination, tactical planning, and execution under simulated combat conditions. The scenario involved rescuing hostages from a fortified position while gathering intelligence and avoiding civilian casualties. Sarah was assigned to a team with 3 other candidates, including a Marine captain who immediately assumed leadership of the group. She was given the role of intelligence specialist and team communicator, responsible for maintaining contact with command and providing tactical analysis during the operation. The mission began with detailed planning based on reconnaissance information. Sarah studied the intelligence reports and identified potential weaknesses in the target's security arrangements. She also noticed discrepancies in the information that suggested some of the intelligence might be outdated or inaccurate.
Captain, I think we need to consider that some of this intelligence might be compromised, she said during the planning session. The guard rotation patterns don't match what we'd expect based on standard security protocols. It's possible the enemy knows we're coming.
The Marine captain looked irritated at being questioned by someone he viewed as less experienced.
Lieutenant, let's stick to the information we've been given. We don't have time for speculation.
Sarah persisted despite his dismissive tone. Sir, if the intelligence is compromised, we could be walking into a trap.
I recommend we develop contingency plans for that possibility.
The captain reluctantly agreed to include backup plans in their approach, though it was clear he thought Sarah was being overly cautious. As the team moved into position for the simulated assault, her concerns proved justified. The scenario had been designed to test the team's ability to adapt when their initial intelligence proved inaccurate. Enemy positions were different than expected, and the hostages had been moved to a new location. Teams that relied solely on their original planning found themselves in impossible situations.
Sarah's suggested contingency plans proved crucial.
When the team discovered that their primary approach was compromised, they were able to quickly shift to an alternative strategy that had been developed during planning. Her ability to maintain communication with simulated command elements while providing real-time intelligence analysis allowed the team to adapt successfully to changing conditions. During the most intense phase of the simulation, Sarah found herself separated from the rest of her team when their route was blocked by simulated enemy fire. Rather than waiting for rescue, she used her knowledge of the building layout to find an alternative path that allowed her to reach the hostage location independently. When she arrived at the simulated hostage area, she discovered that the hostages were being guarded by more enemies than the team had expected. Using hand signals, she communicated the changed situation to her teammates and suggested a coordinated approach that would allow them to neutralize the threats without endangering the hostages. The scenario concluded successfully, with all hostages rescued and the intelligence objectives achieved. During the debrief, the evaluating officers specifically noted Sarah's contribution to the mission's success and her ability to adapt to unexpected challenges. Master Chief Rodriguez addressed the candidates who had completed all phases of the assessment.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've demonstrated the basic capabilities required for special operations work.
However, final approval for specific assignments will depend on additional factors and command discretion. As Sarah prepared to leave Quantico, she felt cautiously optimistic about her performance. She had met every challenge and proven that her small stature and academic background didn't prevent her from performing at the level required for special operations work. But she knew that Admiral Stone would make the final decision, and his opinion of her capabilities would be influenced by more than just assessment scores. The drive back to Washington gave her time to reflect on the past 3 days. She had been pushed beyond anything she had experienced before, but she had survived and even excelled in some areas. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she was capable of handling the pressure and complexity of special operations work. Whether Admiral Stone would agree remained to be seen. 3 days passed before Sarah received word about her assessment results. The call came from Admiral Stone's office on Friday afternoon, requesting her presence for a follow-up meeting the following Monday. The tone was professional but revealed nothing about whether she had passed or failed the evaluation. Sarah spent the weekend trying to maintain normal routines while fighting off anxiety about the upcoming meeting. She had given everything she had during the assessment, but she knew that being capable of meeting the standards didn't guarantee approval for the assignment. Military decisions often involved factors beyond pure performance metrics. Monday morning found her once again standing at attention in the Pentagon briefing room. This time, Admiral Stone was not alone. Master Chief Rodriguez sat at the conference table along with another officer Sarah didn't recognize, a lean man in his 30s wearing SEAL insignia who was introduced as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Stone began, "I've reviewed the complete report on your assessment performance. Master Chief Rodriguez has provided detailed evaluations of each phase, and I wanted to discuss the results with you directly." Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart was beating faster than normal. "Yes, sir." Admiral Stone opened a thick folder containing what appeared to be detailed performance reports and evaluation forms. "Your physical performance was adequate. You met minimum standards in all areas, though your scores were generally in the lower percentile compared to other candidates." Sarah had expected this. Her smaller stature and relative lack of specialized physical training put her at a disadvantage compared to candidates who had been preparing for years specifically for special operations work. However, the Admiral continued, "Your tactical knowledge and decision-making abilities were exceptional. Master Chief Rodriguez specifically noted your ability to think creatively under pressure and your skill at adapting to unexpected situations." Master Chief Rodriguez spoke up. "Lieutenant, your performance during the final team scenario was particularly impressive. Your ability to maintain communication and provide real-time intelligence analysis while adapting to changing conditions demonstrated exactly the type of capability we need for this assignment." Sarah felt a surge of hope but tried to keep her expression neutral. Admiral Stone's tone remained professional, giving no indication of his final decision. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison leads the SEAL team you would potentially be working with," Admiral Stone said, gesturing to the other officer. "I wanted him to review your assessment results and provide his input on your suitability for the assignment." Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Lieutenant Chen, I've reviewed your entire assessment file, and I have some questions about your readiness for this type of work." Sarah's heart sank slightly. Another skeptical officer questioning her capabilities. "My team operates in extremely challenging conditions with minimal support," Morrison continued. "We need someone who can keep up with our operational tempo and contribute meaningfully to mission success. Based on your assessment scores, I have concerns about whether you can meet those demands." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I understand your concerns. Could you be more specific about which aspects of my performance worry you most?" Morrison consulted his own copy of the assessment report. "Your physical scores, while meeting minimum standards, were consistently lower than what we typically see from successful candidates. In the field, there's no such thing as minimum standards. You either can handle the demands or you can't." "I understand that, sir. However, I believe the assessment results don't fully reflect my capabilities because they were based on unfamiliar exercises and equipment. In real operational situations, I would have time to prepare and train specifically for the physical demands of the mission." Admiral Stone interjected. "Lieutenant, you can't train your way out of basic physical limitations. Special operations work requires strength, endurance, and agility that goes well beyond normal military standards." Sarah felt her frustration rising but kept her voice calm and professional. "Sir, with respect, I believe you're focusing primarily on my weakest areas while overlooking my strengths.
Yes, my physical performance was at minimum standards.
But my tactical knowledge, language skills, and ability to think under pressure exceeded expectations.
Lieutenant Commander Morrison looked thoughtful.
Those capabilities are important, but they're meaningless if you can't survive the physical demands long enough to use them. My team can't afford to carry someone who becomes a liability under stress. The conversation was heading in a direction Sarah had feared. Despite meeting all the assessment standards, her performance was being judged insufficient because it didn't exceed expectations by a comfortable margin. She realized she needed to take a different approach. Sir, may I ask what specific concerns you have about my ability to contribute to your team's mission success? Morrison seemed surprised by the directness of her question. The primary concern is whether you can maintain operational effectiveness during extended periods of physical and mental stress. Special operations missions don't allow for rest breaks or modified standards when things get difficult.
Sarah nodded. I understand. But, based on the assessment scenarios, didn't I demonstrate the ability to maintain effectiveness under stress?
During the interrogation scenario, I maintained operational security despite significant pressure. During the team exercise, I adapted to unexpected challenges and contributed to mission success. Master Chief Rodriguez spoke up unexpectedly.
Lieutenant Commander, if I may, I think Lieutenant Chen raises a valid point. Her performance under stress was actually quite impressive.
The scenarios that tested mental resilience and tactical thinking showed her at her best.
Admiral Stone looked between the two officers, apparently weighing their different perspectives.
The question is whether her demonstrated strengths are sufficient to compensate for her physical limitations in a real operational environment.
Lieutenant Commander Morrison was quiet for several moments, studying the assessment reports more carefully.
I'll admit that her tactical performance was better than I expected from an intelligence officer.
But, I still have concerns about team dynamics and operational sustainability. Sarah saw an opening and decided to be more direct than military protocol typically allowed. Sir, if you're concerned about team dynamics, wouldn't it make more sense to include me in some training exercises with your team rather than making decisions based on individual assessments alone?
The suggestion caught everyone off guard.
Admiral Stone raised an eyebrow. Are you proposing an extended evaluation period?
I'm suggesting that the best way to determine whether I can contribute effectively to Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team is to actually work with them under controlled conditions. If I prove to be a liability or unable to meet operational demands, then you have clear evidence to base your decision on. Morrison looked intrigued despite himself.
What kind of training exercises are you thinking about? Sarah had been considering this possibility since the assessment began. Whatever exercises your team normally uses to prepare for deployment.
I would participate as a full team member, not as an observer.
If I can't keep up or contribute meaningfully, then you have your answer.
Admiral Stone leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal.
Lieutenant, you realize that SEAL training exercises are designed for people who have been preparing for this type of work for years? They're not adjusted for different experience levels or physical capabilities.
I wouldn't want them to be adjusted, sir. I need to prove that I can meet your team's standards, not some modified version of them.
Master Chief Rodriguez looked thoughtful. Admiral, this approach would provide a much more comprehensive evaluation than individual assessments can offer.
Team integration and operational compatibility are crucial factors that are difficult to measure in isolation.
Lieutenant Commander Morrison was studying Sarah with new interest. My team is scheduled for a 2-week training exercise next month.
It includes land navigation, combat scenarios, extended field operations, and coordination drills.
If Lieutenant Chen wants to participate, she's welcome to try. Admiral Stone turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, you understand that this would be an extremely demanding 2 weeks? There would be no special accommodations or modified standards. If you can't keep up, you're out.
Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was exactly the opportunity she had been hoping for, but it would be far more challenging than the assessment she had just completed. I understand the conditions, sir, and I accept them. Very well, Admiral Stone said.
But, I want to be clear about expectations. This is not a training program designed to bring you up to SEAL standards. It's an evaluation to determine whether you already meet those standards. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team will treat you as they would any other team member, and you'll be expected to perform accordingly. Morrison nodded in agreement. My team doesn't have time to provide remedial training or handholding. You either contribute from day one or you're gone. Sarah appreciated their directness. That's exactly what I would want, sir. When do the exercises begin? 3 weeks from today, Morrison replied. You'll receive detailed preparation instructions by the end of the week. I strongly suggest you use that time to prepare yourself as thoroughly as possible. Admiral Stone closed the assessment file and looked directly at Sarah. Lieutenant, I want you to understand something. I'm giving you this opportunity because your assessment performance showed genuine potential, despite my initial reservations. But, potential means nothing if you can't execute under real conditions. I understand, sir. More importantly, this assignment in Southeast Asia is not just challenging, it's dangerous. If we approve you for deployment, you'll be operating in hostile territory where mistakes have permanent consequences. My responsibility is to ensure that anyone we send is capable of not only completing the mission but surviving it. Sarah felt the weight of his words. Sir, I appreciate the gravity of the situation, and I don't take the opportunity lightly. I believe I can meet your standards and contribute meaningfully to the mission. Admiral Stone stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. We'll see, Lieutenant. Report to Lieutenant Commander Morrison's office next Friday for your preparation briefing. Use the next 3 weeks wisely. As the officers prepared to leave, Master Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah. Lieutenant, a word of advice. The next 3 weeks are crucial for your preparation, but don't overtrain and injure yourself. Smart preparation is more important than intensity. Thank you, Master Chief. I appreciate the guidance. Lieutenant Commander Morrison paused at the door. Lieutenant Chen, I'll be honest with you. I'm skeptical about your readiness for this type of work. But, I respect that you're willing to prove yourself under realistic conditions rather than just arguing about assessment scores. After the officers left, Sarah remained in the briefing room for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. She had been given an unprecedented opportunity to prove herself with an elite SEAL team, but the challenges ahead would make her recent assessment look like basic training. The next 3 weeks would be crucial for her preparation. She needed to improve her physical conditioning without injuring herself, study SEAL operational procedures, and mentally prepare for the most demanding evaluation of her career. But, for the first time since this process began, she felt that her success or failure would be determined by her actual performance rather than preconceptions about her limitations. That evening, Sarah began developing a comprehensive preparation plan. She had 3 weeks to transform herself from an intelligence officer who had passed a special operations assessment into someone who could function as an integrated member of an elite SEAL team. The physical preparation would be intense but manageable if she planned carefully. She arranged for additional training time at specialized facilities and scheduled sessions with instructors who had experience preparing candidates for special operations selection. Her focus would be on improving endurance and functional strength rather than trying to dramatically increase her overall physical capabilities. More importantly, she needed to study SEAL tactics, procedures, and operational methods. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team would expect her to understand their protocols and communicate effectively using their established procedures. Any gaps in her knowledge would immediately identify her as an outsider who couldn't contribute meaningfully to their operations. She also needed to prepare mentally for the psychological challenges ahead. Living and training with an elite team for 2 weeks would test her confidence, resilience, and ability to earn respect through performance rather than rank or credentials. The team members would likely be skeptical of her presence initially, and she would need to prove her value through consistent competence rather than trying to impress them with dramatic gestures. As she planned her preparation strategy, Sarah reflected on how much her situation had changed in just a few weeks.
She had gone from being a desk-bound intelligence officer hoping for more challenging assignments to having the opportunity to prove herself worthy of deployment with one of the Navy's most elite special operations teams. The path ahead would be difficult and uncertain, but, for the first time in her career, her success would depend entirely on her ability to perform rather than on other people's assumptions about her limitations. That was all she had ever wanted, the chance to prove what she was truly capable of achieving. The 2 weeks of training with Lieutenant Commander Morrison's SEAL team had been the most challenging period of Sarah's military career, but she had not only survived, she had excelled. Her ability to maintain communication under fire, provide real-time tactical analysis, and adapt to rapidly changing situations had earned grudging respect from team members who had initially viewed her as a liability. Now, 3 months into the actual deployment in Southeast Asia, Sarah found herself crouched in dense jungle vegetation alongside Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, watching a suspected weapons trafficking compound through high-powered optics. The intelligence they had gathered over the past weeks had revealed a sophisticated operation that was supplying insurgent groups throughout the region. "Contact bearing 270, Williams whispered into his radio. 2 armed sentries at the main gate, 1 roving patrol on the perimeter." Sarah adjusted her position slightly to get a better view of the compound's interior. Through her scope, she could see stacks of wooden crates being moved by workers who appeared to be local villagers rather than military personnel. This matched the intelligence pattern they had been tracking. The operation used civilians for manual labor while maintaining security through a smaller group of armed guards. "I'm counting at least 15 workers inside the compound," Sarah reported quietly. "They appear to be loading trucks rather than unloading them. Possible shipment preparation." Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice came through their earpieces. "Copy that. Intelligence, what's your assessment of the timing?" Sarah had been tracking the compound's activity patterns for weeks, noting the schedules and protocols used for different types of operations. "Based on previous observations, sir, large shipments typically move out before dawn to avoid daytime traffic checkpoints. If they're loading tonight, departure is probably scheduled for 0400 to 0500 hours." "Understood. All teams maintain observation positions. We need to identify the destination before we move on the compound." The mission had evolved significantly from its original scope. What had begun as intelligence gathering on a local weapons trafficking operation had revealed connections to a much larger network that stretched across multiple countries. The challenge was gathering enough information to dismantle the entire operation rather than just shutting down one distribution point. Sarah's role had proven crucial to the mission's success. Her ability to blend in with local populations and her fluency in Vietnamese had allowed the team to gather intelligence that would have been impossible through traditional surveillance methods. Over the past month, she had posed as a businesswoman, a journalist, and even a relief worker to gain access to information about the trafficking network's operations and key personnel. Tonight's observation was part of the final phase of their intelligence gathering. They had identified the main distribution hub and several key figures in the operation. Now they needed to track a shipment to identify the ultimate recipients and the full scope of the network's reach. "Movement at the front gate," Williams reported. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Sarah shifted her optics to track the approaching vehicles. 2 were standard pickup trucks that had been modified with reinforced cargo areas, while the third was a newer sedan that looked out of place in the rural setting. "The sedan suggests someone important is arriving," she observed. "Plates are too clean for local use." Through her scope, she watched as several men emerged from the vehicles. Most were dressed in typical rural work clothes, but 2 individuals from the sedan wore business attire that marked them as outsiders. One of them carried a briefcase and moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I'm getting photos of the new arrivals," Sarah whispered, adjusting her camera lens to capture clear images of faces that could be used for identification later. "The individual with the briefcase appears to be directing the loading operation." Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice was tense with concentration. "Intelligence, can you get close enough for audio surveillance?" Sarah studied the compound layout and the positions of the various guards and workers. There was a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern side of the property, close enough to potentially allow audio pickup if she could reach it without being detected.
Possible approach via the drainage system on the east side, she reported. I could get within 50 meters, which should be sufficient for directional audio pickup. Negative, Morrison replied immediately. Too risky with current guard positioning. Sarah continued watching the compound activity, noting details that might be useful for future operations. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, suggesting this was a routine operation rather than a special circumstance. The armed guards maintained loose perimeter security but showed signs of complacency that indicated they weren't expecting interference. Sir, I'm observing standard operational procedures, she reported. Security posture suggests they're not aware of surveillance. This could be an opportunity for closer intelligence gathering. Maintain current positions, Morrison ordered. We stick to the plan. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah and Williams documented the loading process and the individuals involved. The briefcase-carrying individual appeared to be supervising the operation, occasionally consulting documents and giving directions to the workers. His presence suggested this shipment was more significant than the routine transfers they had observed previously. At 0347 hours, the loading was completed and the convoy began preparing for departure. Sarah counted 6 vehicles total, the 3 that had arrived earlier plus 3 additional trucks that had been loaded with cargo. The sedan took the lead position, followed by the cargo trucks with the modified pickups bringing up the rear as security escorts. Convoy departing, Williams reported. 6 vehicles total, heading south on the main road. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice came through clearly. Shadow Team, you're cleared to follow. Maintain minimum safe distance and report direction changes. Sarah and Williams quickly packed their surveillance equipment and moved to their concealed motorcycle. The bike was specially modified for quiet operation and had been their primary transportation for covert movement throughout the deployment. Sarah had initially been skeptical about riding pillion during high-speed pursuits, but weeks of practice had made her comfortable with Williams' aggressive driving style. They reached the main road just as the convoy's tail lights disappeared around a bend. Williams accelerated smoothly, keeping the bike's noise level minimal while maintaining enough speed to track their targets. The early morning darkness provided cover, but it also made vehicle identification more challenging. Convoy maintaining southbound heading, Williams reported as they followed the distant lights. Speed approximately 60 km per hour. Sarah monitored their GPS position and cross-referenced it with local maps to predict possible destination points. Sir, current heading suggests either the port facility at Donghoi or the border crossing at Lao Bao. Both are consistent with our intelligence about the network's distribution patterns. The pursuit continued for over an hour, with the convoy maintaining a steady pace along increasingly rural roads. Sarah noted that they passed several potential turnoff points without deviating, suggesting a specific destination rather than opportunistic route selection. Border crossing coming up in 15 kilometers, she reported. If they're crossing into Laos, we'll need to coordinate with local contacts for continued surveillance. Morrison's response crackled through their earpieces. Negative on border crossing. We maintain surveillance on this side only. If they cross, we track the route and timing for future reference. As they approached the Lao Bao border area, the convoy unexpectedly turned onto a smaller road that led away from the official crossing point. Williams reduced speed and increased following distance to avoid detection on the less traveled route. Course change, Williams reported. Convoy now heading southwest on secondary road approximately 5 kilometers north of the border crossing. Sarah consulted her map and felt a surge of excitement. Sir, that road leads to an area we've identified as a possible secondary distribution point. There's a remote compound approximately 20 kilometers from here that's shown minimal activity during our previous surveillance. Copy that. Continue tracking but maintain maximum distance. If they stop, establish observation and wait for backup. The convoy eventually stopped at a heavily forested compound that was much larger than their intelligence had suggested. As Sarah and Williams established a concealed observation position on a hillside overlooking the facility, they could see that the compound contained multiple buildings and what appeared to be significant vehicle activity. This is much bigger than we expected, Sarah whispered, studying the facility through her optics. I'm counting at least 12 buildings and multiple vehicle parks. This looks like a major distribution hub rather than a secondary storage facility. Through her scope, she watched as the convoy was directed to a large warehouse building where additional workers began unloading the cargo. The efficiency of the operation suggested this was a well-established facility with practiced procedures for handling shipments. Intelligence, what's your assessment of facility size and capacity? Morrison asked. Sarah spent several minutes studying the compound layout and estimating the scale of operations.
Sir, based on building size and vehicle capacity, this facility could handle significantly larger operations than anything we've observed previously. This may be a primary distribution hub for the entire regional network.
Understood. Maintain observation and document everything you can.
This changes our operational assessment significantly. As dawn approached, Sarah realized they had discovered something far more significant than a simple weapons trafficking operation. The scale and sophistication of the facility suggested connections to major criminal organizations or possibly state-sponsored activities. The intelligence value of their discovery would likely reshape the entire mission and potentially lead to a much larger international operation. Williams tapped her shoulder and pointed to movement near the compound's main building. Several individuals in military-style clothing were emerging from what appeared to be a command center. One of them was carrying what looked like communication equipment, while others seemed to be conducting some type of briefing or planning session. New contacts at the main building, Sarah reported quietly. Military appearance, conducting what appears to be operational planning. Through her scope, she studied the faces of the new individuals, noting details that could be used for later identification. One individual caught her attention immediately, a tall woman with distinctive features who moved with obvious authority. The others deferred to her in a way that suggested high-level leadership. Sarah adjusted her camera to capture clear photographs of the woman and, suddenly, froze. There was something familiar about the individual's posture and movement patterns. As the woman turned slightly, Sarah got a clear view of her profile and felt her blood run cold. The woman had a distinctive scar running from her left ear down to her collar line. But, more significantly, when she raised her hand to gesture during the briefing, Sarah could clearly see a tattoo on her forearm that made her stomach clench with recognition. It was a sniper's crosshair symbol, identical to one that Sarah herself carried on her own arm, hidden beneath her sleeve. The tattoo was the mark of an elite military sniper unit, a unit that Sarah had been part of during a classified assignment 3 years earlier, before her transfer to intelligence work.
The woman in the compound was Elena Volkov, a former Russian Spetsnaz sniper who had supposedly been killed during a mission in Ukraine 2 years ago. Sarah had attended her memorial service and had mourned the loss of someone she had considered both a skilled professional and a friend. Elena was not only alive, she appeared to be running a major international weapons trafficking operation. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the implications. Elena had access to classified information about American Special Operations procedures and personnel. Her presence here meant that this operation was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. "Williams," she whispered urgently, "we need to extract immediately. This entire operation is compromised." "What are you talking about?" Williams replied, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. Sarah continued photographing the compound while speaking quickly. "The woman directing the operation is a former Russian Special Forces operator with detailed knowledge of American tactics and personnel. She's supposed to be dead, which means someone with access to classified information is involved in this network." Williams studied the compound through his own optics. "How can you be sure about her identity?" Sarah pulled up her sleeve slightly, revealing the sniper tattoo on her own arm. "Because we served together on a classified mission 3 years ago. I know her personally, and I know what she's capable of." The implications were staggering. If Elena was alive and involved in this operation, it meant that American intelligence had been compromised at the highest levels. The weapons trafficking network they had been tracking was likely connected to a much larger espionage operation targeting American Special Operations capabilities. "Command, this is intelligence," Sarah transmitted urgently. "We have a critical development that requires immediate extraction and priority briefing. The operation has international intelligence implications that exceed current mission parameters. Morrison's response was immediate. Intelligence, clarify your traffic. What type of development?
Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that their communications could potentially be intercepted. Sir, I've identified a priority target with detailed knowledge of American Special Operations procedures who is supposed to be deceased according to official records. This suggests major intelligence compromise and requires immediate command review. There was a long pause before Morrison responded.
Copy that, intelligence. Maintain observation for 15 more minutes, then extract to Rally Point Alpha.
We're calling in priority extraction. As Sarah continued documenting the compound activity, her mind was already working on the implications for Admiral Stone and the broader mission.
Elena's presence here meant that everything they thought they knew about this operation was wrong.
Instead of tracking a regional weapons trafficking network, they had stumbled onto what appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence operation with connections to hostile foreign powers. The sniper tattoo that had once represented shared service and mutual respect between professional soldiers had become the key to uncovering a betrayal that threatened American national security. Sarah realized that her deployment with Morrison's team had been even more important than anyone had anticipated. They had discovered a threat that went far beyond simple weapons trafficking. As they prepared to extract from their observation position, Sarah took one final look at Elena through her optics. The woman who had once saved her life during a dangerous mission was now a threat to everything Sarah had sworn to protect. The recognition was painful, but the professional implications were clear. This intelligence had to reach Admiral Stone immediately, no matter what the personal cost might be.